Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Extra Cannon podcast. It has been a fair while, hasn't it? But I come to you today with a pretty special episode. We're gonna basically do a big old transfer roundup. I just lobbed it in our little podcast chat the other day, and a couple of my lovely co-deputy editors / chief editor, he bit at the opportunity, both of them did, to come on and chat about Arsenal's transfer business over the winter period. And here we are. So without further ado, in fact, before I introduce my host, I'm just going to sort of give you guys a little rundown of what I'm going to do in this show. Pretty simply, I'm just going to sort of list all of Arsenal's transfer activity. And for the most part, my role is going to be a bit of devil's advocate. I mean, ideally, I won't be speaking very much because I'm just really interested to hear the thoughts of the guys on all the business. There's been quite a lot. But before I sort of start on that journey, I'm going to introduce my co-host for today. First of all, it's the man who tends to join me most frequently on the Extra Cannon podcast, the official co-host. It's Mac Johnson. How you doing, Mac?
I am doing all right, having a great old time. I am a little ill, so apologies if I mute throughout. I'm likely sneezing or blowing my nose, but it's a pleasure as always to be on and to be talking about a January window that I think a lot of people consider pretty hectic, for more reasons than just Arsenal-related business. But if you exist on Twitter, you know that the last 3 days have been honestly horrible, jarring, genuinely unbearable. Yeah, I would say I am happier than probably most about this transfer window, but at the same time, just excited to speak about it, to hear your opinion, and to hear the raving takes that are going to come from the third member of this podcast, whose hairline's looking pretty bad today. Just figured I'd shoot that out. Getting angry early. All right, got him up. Anyway, cheers, Rob. Thanks for introducing me. Back to you.
Well, as that brief interjection from Alfie Kelshaw suggested, he is too in the room, and I already alluded to it by suggesting the editor-in-chief of weloveyouarsenal.co.uk is here. He's now sort of frantically looking at his hairline to make sure it's not looking too bad. I've got to say, Alf, I don't think it's looking too bad. It's just a cheap shot from Mac, and it's hopefully it just makes this episode a bit more spicy. But here he is. The floor is his for now. Alfie Kelshaw, how you doing, mate?
What are you saying, lads? Yeah, I'm decent. I've got a great hairline, let's be honest. Got to bring back the arrogant theme in my character in this podcast. No, I've got a good hairline. Genuinely, I had to prove it to the boys on our little recording studio by lifting my hair up.
So humbled. He's so rattled right now.
Yeah, somewhat. They're both laughing on the thing. Wonderful presenting skills, Rob. Dusting off the cobwebs. It's been a while for you in the hot seat, but doing very well so far. He's even done prep, which is more than me and Danny do when we host. I occasionally do it, but most of the time I don't. And yeah, I'm extremely tired. Came back last night about 5 a.m. Slightly hungover. Couldn't help myself, just had to go out and celebrate the Jorginho signing so much. What a signing. And I feel like I'm delighted with the window, and I think it's going to be a nice sort of back and forward devil's advocate thing. I'll be one side where I'm very delighted, Rob's a bit more on the other side, and Mac maybe a bit in between. Who knows? So yeah, delighted to be back on the Extra Cannon podcast. It's been a while. Episode 40. Yeah, what are you saying, Rob?
Oh, thanks for asking, Alf. I am very well. And for those that have been tuning into the normal show, you know why there's been a brief hiatus on the Extra Cannon podcast. We sort of built up towards the wonderful drunk cast, which if you haven't already listened to, what you're doing with your life. But we wanted to get to a nice round number so we could record the drunk cast as we always do. But the Extra Cannon podcast is back. Hopefully, we'll be doing things regularly from now until the end of the season. Of course, Europa League football will be back soon as well, so that's something that Mac and I can sink our teeth into. And who knows, there might be a few more special guests joining us on this show, as we often like to do. But yeah, today is all about transfers, and then maybe a little bit of discussion at the end about our game this weekend against Everton. But we'll have a fresh face for that match, as Alfie suggested. We made a deadline day signing, and he came in the form of a man from Chelsea, and we have a lot of bad memories about signings from Chelsea. So that will be something we talk about a little bit later, though. But I will just run you through all the business Arsenal did in January before we go into that. So in terms of incomings, we signed Leandro Trossard from Brighton in a deal worth up to £27 million. And then we signed Jakub Kiwior, I think that's how you pronounce it. He came from Italian club Spezia in a deal worth up to 25 Spezia. Oh god.
Spezia. I was in Italy last week, so.
Oh yes, he was. We have our resident Italian. Spezia. He arrived at Arsenal in a deal worth £25 million. He I suppose was the most obscure of the signings. He's a left-footed centre-back. And that's one which I'm definitely going to struggle to play devil's advocate with. And then, yeah, of course, Jorginho, £12 million from Chelsea. As for outgoings, it was only loans. But we've seen Cedric go to Fulham on loan until the end of the season. That happened on deadline day, as well as Albert Sambi Lokonga going to Crystal Palace. Again, perhaps a little bit contentious on that front, but I think it will be a good move for him. And then we saw, not quite so notable, but Omar Rekik was recalled from his loan spell. He was with Sparta, someone, can't remember who, Mac probably knows. He's gone to Wigan for the rest of the season, and then Marquinhos has gone to Norwich City on loan for the rest of the season. So
Salah Ulam Hand recalled from Hull.
Yeah, but has he been sent anywhere else yet?
I don't think so. It's not that relevant.
So he's going to stay with us.
I don't think we'll be discussing that anymore.
Yeah, but let's focus on those outgoings to start with. Let's keep the listeners a little bit hooked. Keep them waiting for the juicy stuff in terms of incomings. Let's start with Marquinhos. We've seen glimpses of Marquinhos. He started our first Europa League game away in Austria. He scored, but then he really struggled even to gain starts in our sort of second fiddle team. Mac, I'll come to you first. People have been saying, and this is me doing the devil's advocate thing, which is difficult with this one, but forward depth is not necessarily something we have a lot of. Bukayo Saka's the only recognised right winger in the team, even though we have players who can play there. Is this a move that he sort of had to do for his progression, or do you think perhaps we could have kept hold of him for the rest of the season?
I don't know. I think to an extent, keeping hold of him would have been a bit greedy. It's his first season in England. He, as we've seen from his few brief cameos, he's got a lot of technical quality. He's got a lot of quick burst. And he's got a really high IQ, but not quite matched by some of the physical elements and frankly some of the knowledge. It's hard to step directly into Premier League team at 19. Not everyone can be Bukayo Saka. I think this decision truly is about the player, his kind of concerns, his development. I think that he is going to be worth it, frankly, for us to send him out on loan. And I do think, Rob, that with Gabriel Jesus finally back on the pitch, with Reece Nelson still waiting in the wings, with Fabio Vieira available to drift out wide as a substitute if entirely necessary, and with Emile Smith-Rowe, a very flexible player and back-fighting fit, I do think we have enough rotational depth that, should Saka look a little too tired in a Europa League match against somebody from nowhere, we can stick somebody out there and it won't be the end of the world. I think ideally that would be Marquinhos' role, but Norwich do need wide forwards right now, and to give them, because they've just lost they've lost Cantwell to Rangers, and to bring in a young forward like Marquinhos, I think will really help their push, and hopefully he gets regular minutes.
And Alfie, do you sort of think this is a move that Marquinhos really needed? Because I don't know, with him, we obviously saw glimpses of that talent, which sort of forced our hand and made us dip into the Brazilian market. But there must have been reasons why his minutes seemed to dry up after a pretty promising start to life in an Arsenal shirt.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to miss him, really. I think it was pretty pivotal that he got out and plays football. And you could see he came in that first game, and we all we knew nothing about him. I'd watched the scouting video, Arsenal Vision. He was a bit of a punt at 6 million. And we were all sort of questioning what sort of role he will play in the first team this season, whether it will be, whether he'll be on Martinelli and burst on and get loads of minutes, or whether he'll be very much a bit part player, maybe play some under 21s, or he'll go on loan. And I think there was clearly a strategy that we keep him in the first half of the season, sort of assesses his strengths, weaknesses, what he is like as a player, what sort of level he's at this point in his development. And we clearly came to the conclusion that he needed to keep playing football regularly in order to develop, and needed to maybe take a bit of a step down to the Championship, still a very high level, and improve those physical aspects of his game, like Mac was saying. And I thought after that Vienna game, sorry, it wasn't Vienna, Zurich, I thought he was going to be, I thought this is a player we can use a lot this season, because there was a lot of quality, brilliant finish for that goal, a lovely assist for Nketiah. He looked really sharp and technically secure in that game. And then he didn't really push on and get more minutes, and I think you could see that he was someone that needs to keep playing in order to sort of maintain his momentum. And from then on, he barely started. I think he started in the League Cup against Brighton, and maybe at home to Bodo Glimt. But I'm not sure he started another game. He had a few small cameos. But I'm not remotely worried about sort of lack of depth in the forward line now. Mac just spoke about it. If Saka can't play a game, you probably will want to rest him in a Europa League game at some point, maybe even a league game. We've got Fabio Vieira who can play out there, who it may suit more, who's sort of struggling to impose himself physically on games, and maybe if you put him out wide, it will suit him more. Gabriel Jesus coming back, which means he played out there for City and was brilliant. Obviously, Reece Nelson's still about. Smith Rowe, Trossard, Martinelli could all be used on the right. It's probably not their ideal position. So, yeah, I'm not worried. I mean, realistically, how many minutes was he going to play? He might have got maybe 3 more cameos for the rest of the season, like 20 minutes, and that's if he's lucky. And what is the point in having him for that little? I guess you could say sort of being surrounded by, brilliant players and being in a great team environment, but it's definitely more beneficial for his development that he goes to Norwich and plays some minutes.
Yeah, I think it would be very difficult to dispute that. I think the talent is there. What I liked about him is his ability to go both ways, left and right foot. He always seemed very strong, and yeah, he is definitely something of a physical specimen already. So I reckon in the Championship he will be able to really try and refine his game a little bit. So yeah, sort of. I think he's a player that Arsenal will be keeping a watchful eye on. Because, yeah, I think there is promise there, but I think the loan move was needed. Moving on to the next loan, I think this is another player which it would be hard for me to make an argument to suggest that he would sort of be a valuable member of the squad going into the rest of the season. He's someone that sort of this time last year, unfortunately, we did have to depend upon a lot, and I would go as far to say is that it gives me comfort that I know that we don't have to rely on him at all this time around. I'll give the floor to Alfie again, just because I know how he feels about this player. Cedric to Fulham. Keep it concise, Alf, because I don't think we need to spare too much time with this one to this one. But yeah, Cedric has gone to the Fulham. Thoughts?
Good riddance.
Is that
it? Yeah, that's my concise answer. That's a bit harsh. Like he's a nice guy. He's a nice guy. I'll give it to him. He likes being in the picks in the celebrations. He likes being around the club, doesn't he? But not good enough for where we are at the moment. When we were sort of lingering around 8th, bringing him in as a sort of experienced backup to, at the time, Hector Bellerin made a bit of sense, but not now. Like he's played. I think he's made 2 Premier League appearances this season, and it was about 15 minutes combined or something like that. So yeah, just no need having him here, even without getting Fresneda in the end.
Yeah, I think it also marks something of the end of an era for Arsenal, because it's all those sort of
What an
stopgap
era!
era. I mean, not a good era, but it is the end of an era, because all those sort of stopgap signings that were signed in Arteta's first season at the club / that first summer window he had, they're all gone now. All the Urabjian Kia agents, his clients are all gone. So yeah, that is very good. And I would carry on that sentiment and say good riddance to Cedric, even though he might be a nice guy. And it would be nice for him to get a Premier League winners medal if we manage to.
He won't now.
He won't. He won't get one. Okay.
No. So I was thinking about this for certain players. You need to make 5 Premier League appearances, as far as I'm aware, unless they've changed it to get a medal for the team that wins it. So if he goes, he's only played twice, so he won't get one unless we recall him. Recall him for the last 3 games, play him so he gets a medal.
Yeah,
but I think El Neni, who is now, I think, out for the season, I think he's made 5 appearances just, so he will be rewarded.
He had that cameo, didn't he?
Nice.
Yeah.
Lovely
stuff. Right, let's move on to the outgoing, which is potentially the most contentious. I wouldn't say it's contentious because of where he was brought on to play against Manchester City, because we've basically signed a player who can play in that position. This is Sammy Lokonga I'm talking about. He's good in that. I'd say he's better in that left 8 space at this stage in his career, and at number 6 he does have some deficiencies. Mac, do you think this leaves us a bit short if Granit Xhaka was to pick up a knock? It's a very different role if, per se, we called up Fabio Vieira to play in that position. We've seen that he can do it, but it's different. Perhaps Sambi is a more like-for-like profile. Could we regret this one, or do you think it's just something that he absolutely needed at this stage? Things had gone a bit stale, and he also received some pelters the other night for his performance against City, which you could debate whether they were justified or not, but you can see why there are frustrations with the player.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think a lot of the frustrations come from the fact that he can't be Thomas Partey. The fact that he can't fill that same role where he was kind of slotted in against City. I think, frankly, probably the most important thing for Lokonga right now is his confidence and his mentality, just in terms of his development, in terms of if he is ever to be, if he ever is going to be able to make a dent in this Arsenal squad to kind of cement his place. The thing that he could probably use right now is some playing time. We've seen, there's the classic clip in the Arsenal All or Nothing documentary about, you used to be so smiley, and everyone's kind of using it to illustrate this monster mentality that Nketiah's got, and it's wonderful. But I think at the same time, it's clear that he came to the club expecting something, hasn't received it, and it's negatively impacted him. And to go and play for a scrappy Palace side who, frankly, have a pretty strong midfield, but especially in Cheick Doucouré, do not need a number 6. So kind of that number 8 is what's free to him. I think it'll be interesting to see how he develops. Do I think we're a little light on depth? Honestly, yeah, I do. But at the same time, we've got just about enough. Xhaka does not have much of an injury history. When they do, they don't tend to last long. So, God willing, he doesn't get injured, knock on wood. But at the same time, there's reasonable depth and cover. You've mentioned Fabio Vieira. You've mentioned, or I've mentioned, I suppose now, Emile Smith-Rowe, who can play there. But also, we've just brought in another central midfielder who could theoretically cover for that. He's got a very similar passing range, and we know Xhaka's role is one where the kind of lack of mobility is not necessarily as much of an issue as it might be at number 6, which I'm sure is a discussion we'll get on later. And of course, speaking of Jorginho, but just in general, I think I am a bigger fan of Sambi than it feels like most Arsenal fans are, and I'm quite happy to, see him get a move for minutes. At the same time, I'm not entirely sure where it leaves us, but again, I think we're kind of in the same spot where we were before the window. I do think Jorginho's an upgrade, so I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty compelling argument. Alfie, you were shaking your head when you saw Mac speak, when you heard Mac speaking about depth. Why is that? Why don't you have any sort of concerns about that left eight area? Because I think Mac isn't wrong to suggest we might be a tad light on the ground in there.
I don't think there's any depth issues in midfield now, genuinely. If you look at sort of the separate positions of 8 and the 6, we've now got 2 out-and-out 6s in Partey and Jorginho. And we've got 4 players who are basically 8s. You know, you've got Odegaard, Xhaka, Vieira, Smith Rowe. We know Smith Rowe has not spent that much time in that position, and when he has, it hasn't functioned too well. But I think it's a role he can develop into, and if we need him there, we can use him, and I'm not too worried about that. I also think Leandro Trossard can do it. He's done it for Brighton. He's played as a left 8 in a similar system. So, no, I'm not too worried. Again, I think similar to Marquinhos, Lokonga's minutes were going to be very light for the rest of the season, particularly with the signing of Jorginho meant he was, third choice 6 again. It was like we re-signed it, like Elneny was fit. There was just no reason for him to stay. I think I said it on a podcast recently. I said Arteta should be calling up Company, who we obviously know, and selling him to take him to Burnley for the rest of the season because Company loves him. And obviously it's a similar system there, both sort of stemmed from Pep. So that could have worked, but obviously he's gone to Palace. He'll be able to work under Patrick Vieira. I think it's a great move for him. And, if there's a midfielder, if there's someone who can sort of teach him that defensive awareness and positioning, then Patrick Vieira was obviously superb at that side of the game. So hopefully he can sort of drill that into him, because that is the area that he just is so poor on. Like, I couldn't believe some of the instances against Man City. And it was such a shame, because on the ball, he was quite promising. It was just same old Sambi. But he did look like he's lost a bit of engagement. He's not getting the minutes, and I think that's affected his confidence massively. He walked straight out. I know some people read into that a bit too much, but he walked straight off the pitch, didn't go and clap the fans after that City game. He needed this loan move, and he needs to play football. And I don't think he's going to come back and play for us. That's my honest opinion right now. I think he'll leave in the summer, but hopefully he'll have a rejuvenated sort of market value after this move. I just think the issue is he doesn't really fit into either role. Like, he needs to be in a double pivot, and Palace play with a double pivot. It's Decore alongside Schlupp, or who's become a centre mid weirdly, or Hughes, and he's an upgrade on both those players. So him alongside Decore should function well. I just don't think. He's sort of he's a 6 and a double pivot. He's not an 8 or a 6 in Arsenal's system, which is a shame. He was clearly brought in to be the heir apparent to Thomas Partey, and that's just clearly is a big step for him to make, particularly at this stage of his career. So I'm delighted for him. I hope he thrives at Palace, and then we sell him for a lot of money, or a decent amount of money.
Mac, would you agree? Do you think this could signal the end to his sort of permanent Arsenal career? Do you see it a parting of ways sort of coming up this summer?
I think it all depends how he performs at Palace. Interestingly enough, I think if he has an excellent season, that decision goes one of two ways. Keep him in as kind of a 5th rotational option in our midfield if we see the best of him as a 6 or an 8, or we sell. Ironically, I think if he has a poor season at Palace, we will likely send him out on loan again, which technically would keep him at the club for another year. But no, I do think that unless he can really prove that he has what it takes to compete at a high level, Palace, of course, their system is a little different to ours. They tend to sit a bit deeper, but they do have a lot of the same free-flowing principles, and funnily enough, I trust Patrick Vieira as a manager, and especially in terms of bringing up people from, the youth system. So I think overall, I'm not mad about it. And I mean that in the American way, as in I'm quite happy about it, not the British way of I'm not happy about it. But no, I think if he really can prove himself, and if Arteta sees him as a long-term player in the project, then I think he'll stay. But I don't think right now he's earned that on merit.
Yeah, I think that's some pretty good assessment from each of you there. I think it's really difficult to disagree with it. I think he is lacking that maturity at the moment, and who knows, maybe a spell at a club like Palace could be the making of him. It'd be really great if he could be the heir to Partey, but that just doesn't look like it's going to be the case at the moment. But you never know; anything can happen in football. Let's move on to those incomings. I'll bounce straight back to you, Mac. Obviously, Leandro Trossard has been with us for quite a while now. He's made a couple of appearances. I'm just going to ask you, what have you made of those sort of cameos that he's had so far? He obviously started against City, and he had we spoke about him after the United game. He was impactful then as well. How impressed with him have you been? And do you think £27 million will turn out to be money well spent?
I mean, I've always really admired Leandro Trossard. There was a statement from his agent that when he was moving over from Genk, where he played in Belgium, Arsenal, it's not unreported, we did pursue him. And he said he'd prefer to go to Brighton as kind of a stepping stone club. Both him and his agent had that as their setup. And hey, now he's at Arsenal. I'll be honest, I have rarely seen a signing, and ironic given this is the window where we've signed both Alexander Zinchenko and Gabriel Jesus, but I've rarely seen an Arsenal signing slip into the team so seamlessly. I think that in the way he carries the ball, the confidence that he has, his ability to fit into our system as kind of, it's very similar to how Brighton play, but it's a unique role. And just in general, he has the IQ, he has the technical ability, and he brings something different to the team than Gabriel Martinelli. I would, if we're doing the classic, rate it out of 10, I would give him a 9 off of 2 performances, just because I think it's been a seamless move. I think he fits our mold, and the only drawback is that he's 28, which frankly, not the end of the world. We could use a little bit more experience in what is still a very young locker room. And I think, especially in terms of the way that he can change around some of our patterns of play, of course, Martinelli is excellent, but allowing Zinchenko to maybe overlap more could be an amazing thing that he might bring to the squad. I'm excited to see more of him. And I think it's especially important to note that, he's not come into the squad to ride the bench. He's come into the squad to disrupt, to kind of stake himself a claim. And I think what that has the ability to do is light a fire under Gabriel Martinelli. Not to say that he's not passionate and motivated, but he's had a lock on for the starting spot. And honestly, some healthy competition there could be really beneficial.
Yeah, I think it really is an interesting signing. Alfie, you've spoken before about Arsenal sort of lacking that Jota profile within the squad, and there have been comparisons drawn between the two. Do you think the signing of Trossard sort of nullifies our worries in terms of the forward line, or do you reckon we could dip into the market again in the summer if an opportunity arises for perhaps a younger profile? Obviously, the main man we were pursuing has ended up at Chelsea and Mykhailo Mudryk, and does that indicate that perhaps that there is room for that sort of profile as well, or do you think Trossard is sort of that guy for us now who's gonna be part of that forward group, and there's not really going to be any more additions in that area this summer?
I wouldn't rule it out yet. I think particularly if Arsenal sense a good market opportunity for a player that they admire highly, they might still dip in. So as they should. You shouldn't be. If you see that opportunity, you shouldn't hide from it just because you feel like you have good players already. But I would be surprised. I think they're sort of settled with this group of attackers now. I guess it will depend, to see if we have any long-term injuries or how Trossard performs between now and the end of the season. If he's terrible, then maybe they will, but I don't think he'll be terrible. And this is something I said when we signed and we spoke about it after the United thing. The range of outcomes with him is pretty narrow. He'll probably be at least pretty good to very good. He's not going to be an elite player, but as a squad player, it makes a lot of sense for sort of 2 years. I know he signed was it 2.5 year deal? So, we'll probably see him play for, 2 more years, and then he'll probably start declining, and we won't be as reliant on him in 2.5 years than we are in the next sort of 6 to 18 months. I just love the signing. I love it. It's smart business. Again, I've spoken about market opportunities. Arsenal obviously saw the situation at Brighton where he'd fallen out with De Zerbi, and with he had 6 months left, didn't he, with a extension option. So it's smart to sort of get in there when he's available, and it's a very good price. And I think the Jota thing's a bit different because they signed him for a lot more money, and he was younger, and he's sort of more of an integral part of that Liverpool squad than I think Trossard will be. Not that he's having a great season. I think he's been injured quite a bit. But in terms of profile, it's quite similar. Busy dribbler, very technically secure, clarity and execution of technique, and
good on both feet as well.
Good on both feet, can operate anywhere in the front three. He's not spent too much time on the right wing, but he could probably do it. And as we've seen in these first 2 games, he's played 2 appearances. He's slotted in seamlessly in the system. I think he may have a good rapport with Tierney, which works because when we look at our sort of backup team, he'll be playing more with Tierney than he will be with Zinchenko, and it works because Trossard likes to come into the half spaces a little bit more, which enables Tierney to overlap a bit more. So in terms of synergy and cohesion and, with the system, it works. And I was delighted when we made that signing. I think it's a very good signing. And, we spoke about Mudryk, and I'm sure we'll briefly touch on Caicedo when we get to Jorginho, but I think there's all of this sort of debate around Edu about how he's struggling to secure big money moves, and I just think that's such a bad way to look at it. It's not like he's struggled with the negotiations. He's offered insane amounts for these players, and these stubborn clubs have remained. I don't blame Brighton and Shakhtar, because ultimately Shakhtar got the money, and ultimately Brighton kept the player, which they wanted, and they'll probably sell in the summer for a bit less, but it might be worth it if they get into Europe. I don't blame them, but we offered ridiculous amounts. We were willing to go pay over the odds, but the clubs rejected them, and they wanted even more, and it just wasn't worth that money, was it? Like, you have to have a valuation for a player. This is why Chelsea, I've said it numerous times on this podcast, or on the main show, whatever. You have to have a valuation in which you don't go above. Otherwise, you'll end up being in situations like Chelsea United are in, where they show interest. I think United might start to be learning, I'm not sure. They show interest in a player, and the club's like, well, they just pay whatever to get whoever they want. So we'll just add another 10 million, and then they'll probably offer that, and then we could just add more and more money onto our price tag, and you just get sort of moved around and bullied in the transfer market. And we are starting to rebuild our reputation as a buying club by not doing that. We've done that in previous years, but as much as you might desperately want a player, there has to be a price at which you go, no, we'll move on. And there will always be alternatives for less money. And we did that. And I'm delighted we did. And I think it's really smart from the club. The narrative that Edu's like a fraud because he's doing that sort of thing is like running the club smartly is smart. But also, he's not in charge of the finances. So like he probably may not have had the money to sort of, or he may not have had the backing from Conky. So you can't even blame him. But even if he didn't, he made a smart decision to pull out of those moves.
Yeah, and Edu is definitely something we'll sort of talk about more right at the end of the show, where we give our overall rating of the transfer window. But I wholly agree with you. I find the whole, and I think it's probably a symptom of years of being a poorly run club, but you know, that this fan base loves finding a scapegoat, doesn't it? And Edu, like, we're top of the league, and he is a big reason for that in terms of squad building. And I just think he gets so much stick, which he probably doesn't deserve, because let's face it, he's made some smart signings, and I think one of them could prove to be Jakub Kiwior from Spezia. You know, this is a more interesting one, and to me, I can't believe I didn't really think about it coming into the transfer window, needing a left centre back. Like, Gabriel has played every game, I think, this season. Like, of course, he needed some cover, and I just didn't think about it coming into the window. Obviously, he didn't start against City. Mac, would you? So what do you sort of think about the signing? Do you think he's a player who's ready to sort of come in if we need him, or is this someone that perhaps is going to need 6 months to gel a little bit?
I think it'll be interesting. Just a couple of notes on the player for those who may not be as familiar with this profile. Grew up playing in the midfield and, in fact, in the forward line. Has been a set piece taker all the way through some of his U18 times. That said, he is 22. The Athletic had this whole piece on him drawing comparisons to Roberto Carlos at like 6 or 7. Suffice it to say, he's a very good passer, very incisive with the ball, great range. We do need a left-footed center back, as you've mentioned, Rob. We need depth, and I think, you know, he's not started against City, and that is fine. Frankly, trialing Saliba and Gabriel again, Holding to start with, but, you know, trialing Arsenal's backline, regardless, against Erling Haaland is going to be important, come the fact that we play them late this February. So I don't necessarily mind it. I think he's going to integrate pretty seamlessly into our Europa League squad. I genuinely think he's got a lot of talent and a lot of room to prove it. But honestly, at 22, for the price that we paid for him, I don't mind him taking a little longer to integrate in, especially given how good Gabriel's been. But he is very necessary cover. And, you know, we talk a lot about people talk a lot about strengthening positions of strength, right? Which is awesome, and it's amazing. And if you look, you could make the argument that we've got, Ben White, Saliba, Gabriel, Tomiyasu, Kiwior now, plus Holding, 5 very good center backs and 1 center back who is a longtime servant of the club, and I will not say a word against. But that's just because of my agenda. I think that, you know, when those players start drifting out, playing wide, you know, whether it's Ben White being the best right back in the league this season or what have you. Okay, Kieran Trippier, fair enough. But regardless, I think that it's an important move. It's one that strengthens a lot of, you know, maybe areas of apparent strength, but spots where we really do need an extra body. And I think if his passing range and if his, frankly, pedigree turns out to be as accurate as clearly our talent ID thinks it is, then 22 million could be an absolute steal. I've heard nothing but good things from the Italian news sources I've read. I did a little bit of a deep dive just to kind of get to know the player a little bit, and I really like the profile. So, yeah, not mad about it at all. Really like the signing.
Lovely stuff. And Alfie, some brief thoughts before we move on to what I think the listeners will have been waiting for the whole show.
Yeah, I also did a bit of a deep dive, and I watched the Arsenal Vision scouting video. It's becoming a theme.
Classic
of Kiwior, and I was going to do a video on him actually, but then I went away last week, and it didn't sort of work timings. But he is a brilliant passer, which weirdly isn't reflected that much in the data. I'm not sure why that is, but you know, the clips were just so obvious. It was brilliant, sort of line-breaking passes, some lovely switches. He's also pretty athletic for a tall guy. He's comfortable in sort of wider areas. You could use him as an inverted fullback. Max said could be that he plays for Spezia, to be fair. With regards to the data, yeah, that is a good point. I'm not sure how good they are. I'm sure Matt can tell us.
Would you like me to? Is this my re-intro?
Are they like, whereabouts are they?
They're having a
Scary.
better season than normal, which is to say they're 17th and not getting relegated. At least yet. They're not. They're not excellent. He's been one of their all-stars.
I'm assuming they don't have much of the ball then, which would make
No, not at all.
yeah. So it'd be a bit of a stylistic change for him, but having seen the footage, he clearly can adapt to that and fit into that system. I think next season, I think Tierney's going to go in the summer, which means I think he'll be sort of with Tomiyasu, the backup left back. I don't think we'll sign someone. We'll have Zinchenko, and then it'll be Tomiyasu and Kiwior covering that position. And it'll be a much better sort of natural replacement for Zinchenko than he's not quite Zinchenko, but than Tierney is. Clive on the scouting video actually compared him to. He said he's basically the left-sided Ben White, and I think that was quite a good comparison. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that deal. And again, it's an example of smart scouting and smart business. And the teams that were into him, were in for him. I think it was Dortmund. I can't remember who the other team was, but that's
teams in Serie A. I think it was Juve and I think Roma were looking at him as well.
Yeah, well, particularly Dortmund with their recruitment. That's a good sign.
Always bodes well. Okay then, let's move on to Jorginho. Mac, just talk me through the thought process because, like you, most likely there's been a lot of development in the way I've thought about it over the last few days, but sort of tell me why the initial reaction was no.
Well, I'll be honest. I saw the rumor and wanted to vomit. And I mean that quite seriously. I think it's, whether you think of that crazy league match against Chelsea, the one where Hector Bellerin did his ACL, but it was the one where we parked Aaron Ramsey at number 10 in an Arrow Diamond, said lock down Jorginho, and Chelsea couldn't create anything. I've never been a fan of the player. I mean, frankly, part of that's because I dislike Chelsea and don't ever want to be. But, I'd say his pedigree is just as undeniable as the amount that Arsenal fans genuinely hate him, or hated him while he played for Chelsea. I hope they're coming around now. But dude led Chelsea's midfield to a Champions League. Dude, led Italy's midfield to a Euros title. He did play in both of those teams very heavily. I think he's a good player, but frankly, I don't love him. I've always thought that he's a little bit of a rat. His penalty run-up annoys me. And he's 31. And kind of for all of those reasons, I definitely say my initial take was, nah, I'm good. I think for a while I thought it was just a rumor that we were dredging up to really get Brighton to waver on Caicedo a little bit. But I think once reports started coming out from very reliable sources, i.e. David Ornstein, etc., that he was kind of somewhere Arteta had wanted at City, which I do remember, and that he was a player who kind of Arteta had been looking at scouting for a while. I was like, okay.
I think in terms of getting into the top four was our
appreciate how much he's enjoying the utter chaos that is playing for Olympique Marseille in the Ligue 1. Do I want him back at the club? Not particularly. I think we're okay on left backs, and frankly, I think all he's making is a case for him to be sold permanently for a better fee than we got him for. So